All right, folks, it is the top of the hour. Thanks so much for joining me today. Happy to see so many people logging in, and we're going to get right to it. If you have questions, feel free to post them in there in the Q&A, although, and I see there's already one there. I won't be answering them till the very end, but we're just going to jump right in. I'm happy to see so many people are interested in this topic. I wasn't quite sure if there would be, because it's a kind of a scary concept, this fundraising climate change. So I came up with the phrase a few years ago when I was writing my book, but we'll just jump right in and make sure that, well, it looks like there's tons of people actually rolling in right now, but I don't want to delay because we've got so much to do. So I'm going to jump right in here and just get started. I'm Greg Warner. I'm your host for today. I'm also the author of the book, Engagement Fundraising. And we will be talking about that a little bit throughout the presentation. I want you all to know that I don't aim to make any money from the sale of the book. All the money that I get from selling it actually goes to charity. The charity right now is City of Hope, and it's focusing on their diabetes research because of my story with regard to my wife's having type 1 diabetes. So, please don't feel that I'm pressuring you to buy the book. In fact, if you'll email me or message me on LinkedIn, I give away books. I don't really need to make money on the book. I am the CEO and founder of MarketSmart. I'm the inventor of the fundraising report card and also the DAF widget at dafwidget.com. That's free. Fundraising report card's free for up to 5,000 records. And that's pretty much who I am. All right. Today, we're going to start by talking about some, frankly, some dizzying data to describe what I call fundraising climate change. But then we're going to jump into some strategies for how to deal with what I see is not only just coming, but is already here. So these will be high-level strategies. If you're looking for roll up your sleeves and grind it out kind of tactics, it's probably best to just get a demo with one of my staff, and we can give you some more details and metrics and on with that. All right. So again, if you want a free copy of the book, just email us at info@imarketsmart.com, and let's talk about kind of the big elephant in the room for a lot of organizations is the fact that their donor bases are shrinking. This is a scary idea. Now looking at some data from different data sources, we've seen that the number of people giving to charity is declining, sometimes on average, I guess I should say, of 2%, 2.8% a year. It's kind of a big drop. And if you look at the AFP and their fundraising effectiveness project, most recently, they said that it dropped 5% last year. So this isn't really something that we can stand for very long, or there won't be any donors. Now what's interesting about this is that the population, of course, in the U.S. I'm talking about, keeps increasing. So on average, it's going to increase historically between 0.6% to 1% a year. That's adding millions of people every year to become possible donors. However, they're not donating, and in fact, people are stopping donating. Now, some would say that, well, that's because the older generation is passing on, but keep in mind that the big bubble, kind of like like a snake eating a mouse, is that the baby boomers are still entering into this older generation where people tend to become most charitable. So we're seeing that this is only going to continue. We're going to have more people in that cohort for really the next couple of decades. So it's not that people are just dying off, to sound crass about it. Meanwhile, the economy is doing pretty darn well. I mean, I'm no economist, but I hear the numbers. Of course, the big one is the historical low unemployment, but there are others. I know recently we're having a nice uptick in GDP, but we've kind of been on a growth spurt for quite some time now. So while people are not donating as much, or I should say that there are less donors, they sure are buying coffee. So Starbucks is selling more, but when it comes to donating, people are sort of dropping out. So this kind of makes you scratch your head thinking about, well, what's going on here? What are they doing to get share of wallet from the same people? The consumers or donors, I mean, they're the same people, whether they're buying coffee or giving to a cause. So I dug a little deeper and I started thinking that, well, maybe it's because our society is becoming less religious. And sure enough, I found some data, fairly recent data from Gallup, that showed that people in the US are becoming less religious year by year, and it just keeps growing. It seems like it's flattened out just a little bit recently, but that's a really big change, especially since so many studies, and here's just one, that find that the more important religion is to a person, the more likely they are to give to a charity. So those of us in the sector, or the part of the sector that really depends on a religious group of people, this can be quite striking. Another component, I believe, is this leaning towards socialism in the US. Now, when people trust in this kind of government, I feel that they're actually trusting in the government bureaucracy to take care of the things that generally the charitable sector will take care of. Now, I looked at a lot of data, and what was most striking was this recent poll, the Iowa poll, that showed that 56% of likely Democratic caucus goers said that they'd be satisfied with a nominee who thinks the US should be more socialist. So if folks would rather that the government take care of things, that's fairly ominous for us in this sector, I think. Another way to look at it is to turn it on its head and take a look at the favorability of capitalism in the nation. And that has been falling over the past 3 years. Now, it's not so much with the older folks, but especially with the younger folks. And that's not good for the next 20 years or so, if people are not believing in charity to take care of things, but rather more so believing in the government. Now, this is kind of a big kicker, is that people, their trust in our sector, unfortunately, is declining. So I've got two data points here. One is from the Council of Better Business Bureaus and the Better Giving Alliance, where they basically just looked at, do you trust charities today more, less, or the same as you did a few years ago? And what they found is that very few people were trusting them more, and quite a good number are trusting them less. And among those that trust the charitable sector, the nonprofit sector less, only 10% felt optimistic in their trust improving over time. Now, if you don't believe that one, there is another one that comes out yearly. It's the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they've got a section of their survey that's just focused on non-government organizations. And this one just blew me away, because they found that there was a drop in trust by 9% in 2018. But even worse is that among the quote unquote informed public, the drop was twice that. And I've just got to believe that the quote unquote informed public are probably our best donors, or the ones at least that have capacity to give. This is getting scary. All the while, competition keeps increasing for all of us. There are more charities than ever, and it just keeps climbing, especially because people can kind of create a charity on their kitchen table and launch almost over the weekend, and those folks are vying for share of wallet, just like the private sector is, and consumer marketing, and all the other charities. So if people are not giving and just sort of dropping out of giving to charity, it kind of makes you wonder, why is the overall dollar amount continuing to rise? I mean, that number has reached, and we'll get the numbers soon for 2018. Most folks are saying it'll be up another 1 or 2%. Now we're seeing over here, and this is my application. This is the fundraising report card benchmark data, which is free for the whole sector, never a charge to see the benchmarks, and you can log on anytime to that URL. And don't worry, these slides will be made available to everybody. And those benchmarks are live and they're updated every day, because we're always getting new organizations putting their data anonymously into the system so that they can get a whole bunch of charts for their board meetings and for presentations or just for strategy sessions. So I'm going to run through, though, the cumulative or aggregate benchmarks, I should say, that's based on a daily analysis of now what's over $47 billion in charitable giving from over 4,500 organizations. And what we're seeing is that the average gift is increasing nicely. And you'll see in a minute why that is. However, unfortunately, the number of donors retained is going down. And of course, the retention of revenue from those folks is going down. Now, we can slice and dice this a whole bunch of different ways. And again, these are just taken right out of the benchmarks online, and they may be different today because this is a few days ago, but only probably by a decimal point. But first-time donor retention rate going down, reactivated donor retention going down, and repeat donor retention going down. Anybody feel like they see storm clouds on the horizon? Yeah, that's kind of how I've been seeing it. And this is how I've felt, frankly, for, about 10 years when I first got into this sector, changing my marketing and advertising agency that was helping private sector companies. And I started to realize that there was a problem on the horizon for the charitable sector. That's when we changed and started only helping charities. Anyway, let's look at this another way, at only the under $100 donors. And you'll see that the average donation amount's about $25 and the retention rate's 20%, lifetime value only $42. But if you look at the other end, at the $5,000 plus donors, you're looking at $28,000 average gift, which is amazing. Of course, there's humongous gifts in there that are really jacking that up. And that's what's bringing up that average gift amount across the board, as you saw. Now, the donor retention rate is double that of the under $100 donors, and the lifetime value is just exponential at almost $74,000. Now, if we compare these side by side, it's a little easier to see the difference between the under $100 donors and the over $5,000 donors. The donor retention rate is just out of sight, and same with the lifetime value. So what we're seeing here is that while many for decades used to say that there's an 80-20 rule in fundraising, whereby 20% of your donors supply 80% of the revenue, what we're seeing now is it's more like a 70.7 rule. In other words, the donors giving over $5,000 make up only 7% of an organization's donor base, but they are 70% of the donation revenue. While on the other end, those giving under $100 make up 80% of a donor base, but only 7% of all the donation revenue. It's mind-boggling. Now, the 80-20 rule does still stand up in the planned giving arena. And this study by the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University looked at 4,200 plus planned gifts, made 5 universities, and found that there was an 80-20 rule where 82% of the dollars came from just 20% of the donors. But just 66%, well, or I should say this is a good thing, perhaps 66% came from just 10% of the donors. All right, I hope you're not feeling too beat up because I've got more, but don't worry, I'm gonna get to the point where we talk about what you can do about it. Just a little more pounding here and thunderstorms and lightning is this fact that channels are fragmenting. Now, I'm going to show my age here, but I can remember when we just got cable TV, and before that, as a kid, we only had like a dozen channels on TV, maybe a couple newspapers and direct mail, telephone, radio, right? But those channels are still here, of course, but now we've got these new channels and all this digital media, and not to mention Google and search engines, and all the charity navigation kind of watchdog sites. So there's a lot of places for donors to get information, and that really makes it hard for charities to communicate and to promote their messages because there's just so many channels. So because of the change in our society as well, and because of all these new advances in technologies and this fragmentation, there's sort of a taking of control that donors are wrapping their arms around. It's kind of like, the best example I can think of is that way back when you needed a car, you needed to go to the dealership and meet with a salesperson and get the information, and then they had all the information, and then that was the only way you could really buy the car. But now you can be much more self-sufficient. You can go on so many different sites to learn about cars and get an edge on the buying experience, so that when you're finally ready to pull the trigger, you really just need someone, or even sometimes just a website. I mean, I own a Tesla. I bought that off a website. I didn't meet with anybody until I picked up the car. And that was about a minute, and away I went. So I was totally self-sufficient in the way that I purchased my car. And 99.99% of the experience was online. And I enjoyed it. Now, Penelope Burke wrote about, or was interviewed about this recently in AFP's flagship magazine. And if you don't know Penelope, she wrote really this landmark book called Donor-Centered Fundraising, which is kind of a staple on many folks' bookshelves. But and this one's scary also, so don't get mad at me. I didn't say it. But she surveyed 3,000 bequest donors and asked, do you have a planned gift officer? And only 18% said yes. And the majority of those said they give me everything I need, but I don't need much from them. Now, this is like a punch in the gut. And I'm empathetic to all of you reading that. But again, I didn't write it, and perhaps, I mean, I wrote it, but I didn't say it. It came from Penelope and the article. But perhaps those 18% are the 20% that we were just looking at in the 80-20 rule for planned giving among those colleges for that research. And that means that these are probably the wealthier ones that maybe need some help. I don't know. Now, what I call in my book this self-sufficiency that's growing, I call it the 4 selves, because people want to self-qualify. In other words, they don't want to be on your caseload just because you decided, or your prospect researcher decided, or some algorithm decided that they should be on your caseload. They want to be on your caseload because you invited them to have a relationship with them, and you asked permission to involve them in that deep way. Also, they want to self-educate. They want to be able to explore. So you've got to make information accessible for them and convenient. And they want to get involved. I mean, I just signed up to volunteer today. It was very easy. And it was quite thrilling, actually. And I got a phone call from the development person, which was nice. That's not why I signed up. But yeah, they want to be able to immerse themselves on their own without much friction. And finally, they want to be able to self-solicit. So this is essentially what I did when I bought my Tesla. I didn't need anybody to actually ask me. I asked myself. Now, I do believe that at some point it's very powerful, especially when there's a solid relationship, to do a more formal ask and presentation. However, it's kind of like with children, or if you have elderly parents, you kind of can't make them do anything, or even an employee or your boss for that matter. You can't make people do things. You really, even if you ask, you want them to sort of ask themselves. It's when people self-talk and convince themselves, when they think that it's their idea, that's when people really go all in. So that's what I mean by self-solicitation. Doesn't mean that there's no need for an ask any longer. Now, all of this that I'm talking about doesn't bode too well for the traditional approaches. I'm not saying that these need to completely go away, but they probably need to be altered because people are finding these traditional orthodoxies, if you will, more and more annoying, for lack of a better word. Now, nowhere has it been seen to be rejected anywhere more than in Great Britain, where this nice old lady, 92-year-old Olive Cook, was actually receiving over 3,000 solicitation requests a year. And her name was sold and resold to just about every charity out there. And she eventually got written up in the newspaper because of her giving and charitable attitude and how much she wanted to give to so many charities, but the fact that she was just getting really overwhelmed. Now, sadly, Olive took her own life shortly after the article was published. And then, of course, many, many more articles came out about the fact that she was bombarded by all of these requests. Now, after that, a commission was established, and the result was the General Data Protection Regulation that many of us might be dealing with, which requires, at the very least, an opt-in and permission-oriented type of marketing. And it is required that people have the ability to opt out very easily. All right, so let's take a deep breath, right? We just said that competition's increasing. There's less people giving, so the pie is shrinking. Trust is declining. A fraction of the donor base is making up the majority of the revenue. And the channels are fragmenting while the overall preferences are changing in our society. This is what I call fundraising climate change. And I'm not the only one who's noticing it. It's just I'm the one who gave it that title. Elizabeth Boris, with the chair of the Growth and Giving Initiative, says giving's increasing because of larger gifts from richer donors, but smaller and middle level donors are slowly but surely disappearing across the board. And Brian Lauterbach at Network for Good, nonprofit organizations now being challenged by major political, demographic, economic, and technological factors outside of their control, and most organizations are finding themselves flat-footed. unable to easily adapt. And I think that's partly leadership's role and the board members' role to be able to steer the ship and to help organizations recognize that they need to be nimble and they need to adapt. Look, a lot of industries have changed in the past 20, 30 years, and the charitable sector is no different. So when I'm asked, well, what should we do? Well, I give the answer, and then what ends up happening is a lot of folks end up just deciding to do more of everything, more of the old. And unfortunately, they have found diminishing returns. I mean, you could spend more money, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to increase your revenues. And even if you doubled that cohort of under $100 donors, then you're only going to get to, instead of 7% of your revenue, you'll get it to be 14%. I mean, it's just not enough to really move the needle. Especially with donor preferences changing, I think, and this is why I got into the sector in the first place 10 years ago, maybe it was 11 at this point, is that I think donors are getting fed up. And they just want to find joy in their charitable giving. So they're looking, there's actually pent up demand for fairness and respect and control, as I described with my Tesla purchase. They want to be asked for permission. They want to opt in and opt out as they see fit and self-navigate their own decision-making experience. And of course, convenience is one of the most important things. If you think about the growth of Google, one of the driving forces behind it is the fact that it's so darn convenient. They just remove all the friction from the process and they put all the control in your fingertips. This is what we call value. This is a classic marketing value proposition that for too long, too many charities have kind of missed. And they've done things thinking that, well, they're different and they don't need to provide value in the way that the private sector has figured out value. Another part of it is that when it comes time to meet face-to-face, they'd prefer that your outreach occur when they're ready, okay? So just imagine that if you were surfing online first time looking for a new car and then a car salesperson shows up at your door. I mean, you're not ready. You're ready when you go down there to go look at the car and kick the tires and take it for a test drive. So that's when people want to meet. Hounding the donors for attention or action before they're ready, as I said in my book, is generally only going to annoy them and burn bridges. And this is how I felt. So let's take a deep breath here. You know, sadly, there will be, just like in any industry that undergoes change, there will be winners and losers. You know, I remember growing up, we had a wall filled with Encyclopedia Britannica books my parents bought. Salesperson knocked on the door, was going through the neighborhood. That's how it was done. It's kind of replaced by Wikipedia. Taxi cabs are now getting the shove a little bit from Lyft and Uber. Not sure Uber is going to make it. We'll see. No, a lot of people thought Amazon wouldn't make it, and look at them now. Uber's not profitable yet, but we'll see. And then we've got Blockbuster. Remember Blockbuster? Yeah, bye-bye. So the common thread between all of these is technology. Now, there's almost sort of talk about losers. I mean, there's sort of a death watch going on here on this education drive site. And again, I put links in beneath everything so that later on when you get the slides, if you want, you can go to those sites. But I call it a death watch because this is a site that looks at every college and university that's either on the bubble or closed. Now, according to Moody's, 1 in 5 small private colleges is under fundamental stress, and a quarter are in the red of the private colleges. And that's a big number. And they're watching it happen. I would guess that most of them, if they had strong fundraising operations, are still doing fine. So the winners now and in the future are going to be the ones that learn how to use technology to lower costs and generate results so that they can sort of ride the waves past what's occurring over there with fundraising climate change and sort of hampering the results that, that others who failed to take heed to the warnings are facing. Now, leveraging technology tends to make everybody happy. It makes fundraisers be the people, the fundraisers they always wanted to be, and do their jobs more efficiently, build relationships with people who want to have relationships, and it especially makes the donors very happy because it's providing them with value. So I hope that's enough of the fundraising climate change doom and gloom. And let's get to the and what to do about it kind of section here. You know, and before I jump too far into that, I want to make sure you understand that there is no quick fix. I know that there's lots of folks out there always running around with some new shiny object, but the quick fixes don't really happen. There might be some technology that you can leverage that'll make things more efficient, but you simply can't make big donations happen fast. And the traditional interruptive, transactional, arm's length approach that's focused on those low dollar donations that get made impulsively by donors are just not going to be able to sustain our missions, your missions. So I'm going to go through 3 strategies for success. And then just a reminder, in case you weren't here at the very beginning, is that if you want to really dig deeper and see some data and see results related to these kinds of strategies, I invite you to reach out to us and talk to us more individually, and we can really do a deep dive. But for now, I'm just going to talk about these strategies and remind you that the tortoise beats the hare every time. And this is one of those tortoise beats the hare kind of operations or strategies, I should say. It's a contemporary, technology-enabled, compassionate approach that helps supporters self-navigate their decision-making process that is necessary for this more highly considered decision, which is more, if you can see the foreshadowing, I'm talking about major gifts and legacy gifts mostly. It's about providing people with more value, okay? So let's jump into these 3 strategies, and then we'll wrap it up with some questions. Number 1 is probably no surprise to anybody, is that you should focus on the 80-20, or what I was saying before is really now becoming more like the 70.7. What's interesting about this is if you look at the budgets assigned to retention, major gifts, even mid-level giving, and especially legacy giving, the amount of revenue that comes from the top of the funnel compared to the budget that's assigned to those areas is kind of out of whack. It seems that we're always spending more money on acquiring new donors, yet there's a leaky bucket and they're not retaining and not really getting the experience that they had hoped for. And what I believe is that they keep hopping around from one charity to another looking for a home, and then they finally give up. So I think budgets need to be looked at properly, and folks need to invest more at the top of the pyramid. Now, keep in mind, this is a little self-serving because I invented software that people would buy in that regard. But I didn't invent that software until after I got involved with one of my charities and saw this from a marketing perspective. I mean, this isn't, I built this company because I thought it was the right way, not because the budgets were there. I'm telling you, it's been 11 years now, and I'm saying the budgets need to go there. And the customers we see assigning bigger budgets there are doing better. Now, if you assign budgets there, or even if you don't, and you need to do it at low cost, you can find new major donors without actually hoping that they'll go from a low dollar donation and move straight up the pyramid, which takes a while. You can actually gain new major donors or prospective major donors through referrals. Referrals are the #1 way that private businesses, private sector businesses generate business. It's the lowest cost and the best revenue and the most profitable, and it works in the nonprofit sector as well. One way is to use a survey, and we'll get into surveys in just a minute, but you can ask people in your survey if they would like to recommend a friend or invite a friend who's also interested in your mission to get more involved. And you can ask them, how would you like to do this? Would you like to make a personal introduction, or do you just want to share information on our behalf? But this generates a lead, and this helps you know that there's someone on the radar there. And by the way, your wealthy donors know other people who are wealthy, and they know that they have similar interests. So referrals aren't as hard to get. And if you're okay with asking for donations, you got to be okay with asking for referrals, either with a hard ask, straight up, face-to-face, or by telephone, by email, or using a softer ask, using a survey, which, by the way, you could just print out a few questions. And I recommend at every board meeting that there be a mini survey to find out about interest in supporting, giving, referring, legacy giving, and so on. So that's just, you're talking about typing something in Word and printing it on a sheet of paper and putting it in the packet. Not expensive at all. And just one new relationship could be really life-changing. #2 is that you can find new major donors among your volunteers. So the U.S. Trust study of high net worth philanthropy found that the high net worth individuals, I mean, they volunteer at almost 50% rate. Now, it's interesting. I was talking to a gift officer about a year ago, and he told me a story of how he had made outreach to someone who was put on his caseload. He called, got the person's significant other on the line, and asked for the man, you know, who and his wife said, you know, who's calling? And he said, well, I'm calling from, it happened to be a museum. And she said, well, he's at the museum right now. He's a volunteer. So he hadn't realized that the guy was right there in the building. So they're right there. They are there. And oftentimes they're volunteering as a way to test and kind of do a little bit of surveillance, if you will, to see if you're worthy. And they're on average, they're volunteering at 2 or more organizations. At least 55% of them are. And they want to give. I mean, 84%, according to this study, gave to some, most, or all of the organizations for which they volunteer. So not only are they giving their time, but they are giving their money. Now, the last one might surprise you on this 80-20 focus is social media. Now, our customers have found using LinkedIn, and we've helped with that. And but I don't want to focus too much on what we do. So I found this little case study from Bentz Whaley Flessner, where they only spent $900. I'm sure that's not including consulting fees, but the cost on Facebook was only $900, and they acquired 43 new major donor prospects, people with certain level of income, certain age group, and so on, that were advertised to and signed up for a newsletter. They opted in for the beginning of the relationship, if you will. Now, you got to figure out of 43 that there's going to be at least one that'll turn into a solid prospect that'll meet and eventually give. I think it'll be a lot more, frankly. So moving on from the 80-20 rule, let's go to number 2, which is all about supporting your supporters. I know it's a little bit strange notion, but really the more that you give and the more that you support your supporters, first and early in the relationship, the more they're likely to support you and your mission. So supporting them requires understanding who they are and why they care, where they are in the consideration process, and so many other things. But those are the big ones. So if you focus more on them and their needs and where they are in the consideration process, then and if you focus a little less on your internal processes, you'll have a hit. Now, I know that most folks have an internal process that they're familiar with, pretty much kind of looks like this. However, the donors don't really care too much about this. Their process is more like this. It's more like, first they're going to become aware of something, they'll become interested. It's kind of like, oh, I see it, I understand it, I want it, and now I'm going to do it. And then after they do it, they wonder in their own mind, was that good or was that bad? Did I like it? Do I want to do it again? And folks can move forward or backwards in this consideration continuum, sometimes over days, weeks, months, and even years, especially when it pertains to major giving and legacy giving. Now, low dollar decisions go through this process as well, but very, very fast, sometimes in a matter of seconds. And that's the result is a credit card or a check or some coins in a bucket. The high dollar, highly considered decision is a very slow process. And of course, the results are exponentially greater. They're talking about homes and appreciated assets, cars, jewelry, real estate, right? So if we're looking at this consideration continuum, it's important to understand that since this is going to take so long, you have to recognize that people are going to spend most of their time in what I call the why stage of the consideration continuum. It's very few people, and only for a short period of time, that they consider how they're actually going to make the transaction. Most of their time is thinking about the why should I do this in the beginning, and most of the people, that's why it's a wider funnel, are going to be in that stage. And then after, they're going to think to themselves again, why should I do it again? This requires a tremendous amount of trust and value that you provide to them. So in other words, your job as a marketer, if you're doing your own marketing, is to help the people at the left end of that funnel, if you will, where most people reside for most of the time. Help them build trust in you and your organization. Help them think about their lives and their autobiography and their history. Help them contemplate their own heroism and how they could be a hero in their own life story, how they can find joy from giving or building relationships with like-minded people and community. And the only way you can do that is if you learn about them and why they care, who inspired them to care, what are their interests and needs, and where they reside in the consideration process. So we've determined that the best way to do this, and it's been a decade now, and we determined that the donor surveys is really the best way to do this. Again, I'm a little biased in this because I did invent the application and the software for what I think is the best donor discovery and qualification prioritization tool that leverages technology. However, if you're not interested at all whatsoever in working with us or even hearing us out, that's okay. I invite you to take a look at the ultimate how-to guide for conducting donor surveys so you can do it on your own. There's also free webinars on my website, not only by me, but Dr. Russell James did one on surveys and Pamela Grow as well. So I just want the information to get out there. There's only a small number that will actually want to talk to us, and that's okay. Once you understand people and where they are in the consideration process and how they perceive value, then it's important to build a place for them to self-involve and self-navigate their decision-making process. The problem is that most organizations, and this is just a wonderful college, our friends in Kansas, who we thank every day because they're just so terrific, is unfortunately most organizations like theirs have other priorities, recruiting students and so on. So the major donor and legacy donor will find it hard to find their space here. And sometimes the fonts are even too small and it's hard to navigate and they can't figure out where to donate and so on. But what this is, and this is our VIP microsite, if you will. It's focused on major giving, legacy giving, impact giving. It's focused on helping people realize the best versions of themselves and find meaning in their life. And this is their corner for those older folks who've made it and are looking to self-actuate, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It also removes the friction is what you should do. And again, you can have your team build these, but I'm showing you some recommendations is that you should include a DAF tool, which I provide free at dafwidget.com. And that DAF tool you can put on your site so people can search and find their donor advised fund. And without friction, they can make their recommendation, meaning their gift. Okay? All of this content is really specifically for them. This is what they're looking for so that they can self-navigate and become familiar and see who's like them and really get involved. Now, once you have that online area, which of course is exactly what I used when I bought my Tesla, then you really need to monitor what people are doing on that site. And it's best to not monitor aggregate data, but more so to monitor individual behaviors, which is entirely possible if you leverage the right technology. In other words, you can monitor the digital body language of each individual donor as long as you get them to opt in and get their permission. When you monitor digital body language, it makes it easier, much easier to see when people are ready for your outreach so that you're not chasing, going on wild goose chases and coming up with false positives if you're getting prospect research. Not that it's all bad, but if you're running into dead ends and false positives, then you're likely to want instead to leverage technology to find out when people want you to reach out to them. So what this does essentially is monitors click habits and behaviors of individuals so that you can see where they're clicking, and then you can change how you communicate with people based on their digital body language and their click histories, if you will. So number 3, the last recommendation here strategically is to make legacy giving a priority. Make those messages ubiquitous and about life, not about death. Death is very off-putting. People don't even generally like to hear about legacy gifts that came from people who are now dead. They prefer to hear stories about legacy gifts that were made and the people are still living. That's based on research from Dr. James. Now, think about it this way, is that focusing on legacy gift marketing really produces exponential returns, but you do have to wait. There is some time gap there, but your organization will be much better off. As an example, Donna here, even if she's a great repeat monthly or annual fund donor, it'll still take her 228 years to equal Sharon's single legacy gift, which is an average of $57,000. So why are budgets so minuscule when it comes to this kind of marketing? Doesn't make sense from a marketer's perspective. I think that people really get addicted, if you will, to the transactional nature of the low dollar donations. You know, it's almost like the slots versus playing craps. You know, more people play slots. They like to hear the ka-ching all the time. It gets them excited. So to make it more ubiquitous, you really got to do an assessment of everything that you produce and think about where you can put these messages. However, try not to make the messages about death. In other words, it's not all about the how stage, which is too many people focus on the how of legacy gift marketing, yet very few people will be in the how stage at any given time. Most people are either going to be in the why stage, either before they make the gift or after it. They're going to be wondering, why should I keep you in my will? So these why messages are what we recommend, and you can do it on the cheap. And you've got to gain partnership from other departments. For instance, you could just make a little poster like this and bring it to events. Not a bad idea. Very easy. Generally focused on the why stage, not on the how stage. You should post any members of your legacy society that are willing to share their story. You should post that, maybe a video, maybe something else about the person on Facebook, because that helps others recognize that this is something they can do and should do. And one other idea is, and we created it's sort of a workbook for people to think about their autobiography and their ethics and values and what they want to pass on to their loved ones and children and grandchildren and so forth, so that they can feel that they're leaving something really wonderful behind for them to remember them by. So by helping your donors go through the why stage and including questions about what charities they care about, as they're thinking about that and their autobiography, they're probably going to realize that they want to be more charitable. So the point of this is that while these will planning kits and all that stuff is good, you're going to get solid leads that are ready to take action. You will get fewer leads because most people are not in that stage of the consideration process. And when they are, it's usually for a shorter period of time. So I recommend mixing with the how offers to provide value. You also consider many why type offers. And never forget that a large percentage of the dollars are coming from bequests with hardly any marketing, frankly. But the budget is just kind of misappropriated, in my humble opinion. So I think it's important to make these messages ubiquitous. And then, if you can, when you're looking at the leads you generate, try to focus on the 80-20. Maybe do some well screening, or at least in your surveys, try to determine the level of capacity they have, which I describe to a certain degree in my book and also in that report on donor surveys, of how you can find out if people have capacity and get that information straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, rather than depending on well screening services that I have personally found are not all that accurate. So that wraps up our presentation for today. The 3 takeaways are to focus on the 80-20, support your supporters, and make legacy gift messages ubiquitous and about life. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me today. Again, you'll get an email shortly after that'll include the recording of this that you're welcome to share. And you can, you could buy my book if you like to contribute to City of Hope and diabetes research. But otherwise, if you reach out to us and would prefer a free copy, that's fine. We could give it to you in Audible, PDF, Kindle, or a hard copy. Happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. If you want to check out the fundraising report card for your data, please go there, fundraisingreportcard.com, or check out the benchmarks for free any day, any night. And of course, you could always log in and see my blog and tons of free resources at iMarketSmart.com. So with that, I see that there are a number of questions here. So I'm going to jump in and let's see, I have not read these yet, so I hope this is okay. With the vast number of nonprofits asking for the same dollars coinciding with funders tightening the reins of giving, how can an agency break through all the noise, stand out, and gain the attention of a funder without shouting, but our agency is different? This is a great question. I'll tell you what, you will stand out so significantly in such an easy way. It's so simple, it's almost crazy. If you give and give wholeheartedly and give to the donor with love, and you try to provide them with value in line with their interests, needs, and where they reside in the consideration process, you will stand out, because hardly anybody else, unless they're our customers, are really giving in that way and providing people with a VIP experience, especially online, and not hounding people and over soliciting. So I strongly recommend that you give to your supporters. The challenge with this is that very often leadership, and this is unfortunate if this is the case in your agency or organization, leadership wants a return immediately on every dollar of output or outreach and communications. Now, that's good for them and the agency and the organization, but it's not the way the donor wants it, especially the major and legacy gift donor. They want value and they want to be treated with respect, and they don't want to be expected to give and make a decision on the timetable of the organization. So you've got to give several times to build trust and sort of help attract the donor to you rather than you going out and soliciting them. And leadership is going to have to acquiesce to this, or they're just going to keep on that treadmill, hamster wheel, if you will, of gaining new low-level donors and losing them. But the major donors and the legacy donors just don't want that short-term, impulse-oriented, transactional type marketing. Just doesn't work. There are several questions here about the slides being made available. Yes, you'll get an email with the slides. It's a Google slide, public-only viewing. Okay, so here's one about capitalism and socialism. Couldn't you argue that an awareness of the failure of capitalism would only drive people to give more? I don't know. I'm not an economist and sociologist or anything like that. I guess you could argue that that might drive people, but I think that the biggest reason why people would give and give more is because they're gaining value in some way that really is personal and relates to their life story. For instance, if their mom was at a hospital and was well taken care of before she died, then they will want to give to that hospital because they got something from them. It's the law of reciprocity. It's about value. I think if I were to pick ways to build or to drive people to give more, I don't think it's arguing about socialism or capitalism, but it's more so in providing value in line with needs. So let's see, I'm skipping down. A lot of people wanting the slides. Yes. I'm a planned giving officer for a religious social service organization. Are the trends noted and identified, segmented according to what type of nonprofit charity, or is this generally speaking? And I'm going to tell you, yes, it is all provided in general, but if you go to the benchmarks on the fundraisingreportcard.com/benchmarks page, you'll see on the right-hand side that we do categorize these benchmarks by sector. I think there's about 11 of them, you know, environmental, religious, colleges, universities, arts, things like that. So you can compare your particular segment with others that are just like you. And then I encourage you to upload your data, although there may be a cost for you to get your reports. However, whatever amount of time it takes for you to prepare reports for your board, quarterly or weekly, monthly, whatever it is, it only takes a couple of seconds, if that, for the fundraising report card to digest the information and prepare literally dozens, if not hundreds of different kinds of reports. All right, have you examined wage growth versus inflation data over the past 20 years? The gap being generated is growing exponentially and may be a factor driving the socialist leanings, unfavorability towards capitalism, and an increase in distrust. I think you're probably right, Matt. I think you're exactly right. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an economist. I'm just reading it and recognizing that this is happening, and that I believe that the way to do it is by providing value. So Matt also asked, is HubSpot worth the investment? So it's kind of funny you asked. We used to be a HubSpot certified vendor partner when we were an ad agency and marketing agency. You know, and since you're asking, what I did was I essentially built HubSpot, but for the charitable sector, for the nonprofit sector. So that's what our system does. But HubSpot's really, in my opinion, for the private sector. It's not designed for fundraisers. And if you take a look at a demo of what we do, I think you'll see that there's a very big difference. Can you give a concrete example of 2 or 8 of digital body language that indicates a prospect is ready to be asked? Absolutely. So the first one is, for instance, if people actually fill out a form or click on an email that has a calendar tool on it, for instance, that says, yes, I want, they want to book an appointment with you because they want to talk about giving. So that's a good one. How about people clicking on the DAF widget to donate, or perhaps on a survey earlier, they clicked and they filled it out saying that they have a donor advised fund. And then a week later, they click on the DAF widget on your microsite, right? That's a pretty good indicator that they're actually doing something. And maybe they want outreach to help facilitate. And maybe, in fact, they want to designate their gift, or they'd like to talk about opportunities that you have, products, if you will, that you have that they didn't know about. So these are I've got more of them then, if you want to reach out to us and we can show you what are the best signals. Charles, have been following the work your work for a few years. Thank you, Charles. I absolutely love the work you guys are doing. I desire to work for an organization using your services. Well, okay, this is not planned. I'm also interested in helping you sign on more organizations. Wow, okay, we're gonna call you right away, okay? Thanks, Charles. All right, I think I've run through everyone, and we are at the top of the hour. So I'm going to close it here. I want to thank you very much for your time. Keep your eye out for the request for you to take the survey. I am happy to hear any critiques, positive or negative. I definitely want to improve and provide more value to you. And with that, I'm signing off. Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best of luck.